Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another edition of Data Chat Live. I am Cameron Cowan, your host. With me as our regular arrangement, Mike Fong, all the way from balmy London. Is London balmy at this point, Mike?
It's actually completely beautiful today. We had lunch out in the sun.
Awesome. We are also very excited to bring in for his encore performance, our Chief Technology Officer, Dave Smith. Say hello to everyone, Dave.
Hello.
We are really excited to have Dave join us today. And for those that are longtime followers of the webcast, you'll know that we've had Dave on before. It was back in February of this year. Today, our topic is all about website cookies. And in our first session with Dave, we went kind of basic. We said, let's start at the very definition of what cookies are, and we kind of built knowledge from there. We got such good response from that early show that we wanted to bring Dave back and get a little bit deeper, get into some of the more intricate parts of what cookies are, how they're set, where they come from, but also get his perspective on where they're going and how the market is evolving. So with that set up, Dave, first, I know you and your team have been doing a ton of research on just cookies, website cookies in general, over the last several months and quarters. Are there any things that you see that are sticking out that you've learned over the course of, let's say, the last 6 months that you didn't know before? Let's start there.
Great question. I think that, first of all, what I've come to appreciate over the last 6 months is just how complex this landscape is. I mean, you may think, just as an example, you may think, all right, I've got Google Analytics on my site. There should be a cookie from Google Analytics. That's true. But, where are all the places that cookie can be set? Well, you might be surprised to learn that it's a lot, and so if you're managing the technology on your site, a lot of customers come to us and say, hey, I've got this cookie. I don't know where it's coming from. Help me out. And what we found is that, and this is probably the biggest learning, is that most cookies actually have multiple originating initiators. Not most, I mean, the biggest, most popular cookies do. And so people will say, hey, I'm trying to remove this cookie, or I'm trying to make sure it's present. It turns out there's a lot of ways to get a cookie on a page. And so if you're responsible for those cookies, there's a lot of places you need to go, a lot of threads you need to pull on to make sure that those cookies are where you expect them to be and not where you don't expect them.
I always say that it's basically, you cannot get away from the Google Analytics cookie. It might be it might be in a header, it might be in GTM, It might be in DoubleClick, it might be in your Google Global Tag. They're going to get you somehow.
Yeah, it's coming for you. And I think the record I found was 4. Like, there was a cookie, I don't remember exactly which one, but there were 4 unique initiators. So you might think, oh, I got rid of it. Oh, I got rid of it. Oh, I got rid of it. Nope, not until the 4th time, then you really got rid of it.
And help me understand, a lot of people, and we talk to a lot of folks that are saying, I got to be privacy compliant. I have a list of the cookies that are approved on my site that should be there and are allowed. All of a sudden I scan and I see 2 or 3 that pop up that aren't approved, that I don't even know what they are or where they're coming from. As far as that happening, is that something that they can figure out themselves? Can they just go to a Chrome browser and open up the dev console and figure that out themselves? How do they go about that?
It's very hard. This is another thing we've learned. It's very challenging to manually go to your own website and accomplish 2 things. One is to get a complete picture of all the cookies that your website is producing. Very challenging to do that manually in a browser, even with dev tools, even with a lot of experience and knowledge. And number 2, once you have found those cookies, it's very challenging to manually track where they came from. Even if you're a dev tools expert, some of these things are just almost unknowable in these tools. It requires automation to scan your site. And I'll just give one example of why that is, why it requires automation. But, if you've got a cookie that's a client-side cookie set by a JavaScript file, you can search all day for that in the dev tools, and you will probably not find the initiator for it. And that's because it uses JavaScript APIs to set that cookie. And unless you've actually installed hooks to intercept those API calls, you just won't be able to detect that it has happened. You'll see the cookie, you just won't know how it got there. That's where Observe Point comes in. Of course, we've built all that instrumentation to help you identify that.
Yeah, so why don't you talk to us a little bit about what we have built? We don't normally spend a ton of time on our UI and our product and on DataChat Live, but this is really cool technology that people can't get to in other ways. There's been discussions about patents that have been filed. Tell us a little bit about cookie initiators that your team has developed.
Yes, so we call this feature the cookie initiator or the origin story. And you can think of it as a family tree for your cookies, because it turns out a cookie, of course, can have multiple initiators like we've seen, and those initiators can have initiators, and so on and so on. In the same way that you have parents and they had parents and they had parents, cookies are kind of like that as well. Not only that, but cookies can undergo changes during the life cycle of a page load. You navigate to a page, a technology sets a cookie, or maybe the cookie was already there. Maybe a technology extends the expiration date on that cookie. Maybe a technology changes the value of that cookie. Observe Point now with this patent pending feature will tell you all of that. We'll tell you exactly what changed and when over the life cycle of a page load. We'll tell you what technologies initiated that cookie. We'll tell you what technologies initiated those technologies, and you can follow the chain. And like I said before, we call this the origin story. It's a new patent pending feature that we launched about, 3 months ago or so, Cameron?
Yeah.
It's become very, very popular because people can now answer questions that they just couldn't answer before. And we believe there's no other way to answer these questions. Like I said, it's very, very challenging. And just a little teaser, we're working on another generation of this to make this information even more readily available so that you can see holistically across your whole site all the different initiators and technologies. And look for that in the next few months, but there's going to be some really good stuff coming out to help you really get your arms around all the cookies and all the initiators across your whole site. Because right now it's great, you can go deep on one cookie, but really we want to know, look, what are all the initiators across all my thousands of pages?
Yeah. And when I look at this, I always want to make sure I understand and our audience understands what we're looking at here. So we have all of the basic information about cookies that most people can gather, things like the duration, the settings for same site or secure. But we've also got this origin story here, and it's telling us who, or not only if there's one or many initiators and what that initiator is. So in this case, we've got the one trust consent banner that set a cookie based on what I said is my privacy consent. I also have the set method. Tell us a little bit about how the different ways in which cookies can be set, because there's a couple, if I recall correctly.
Yeah,
right?
there are two ways. There are two fundamental platform mechanisms that the web allows you to set cookies, and one is what we call server side, and the other is what we call client side. Now there are multiple ways to describe these, but I find that server side and client side are the easiest way for me to understand. And in the end, once a cookie is created, it behaves the same. So it doesn't actually matter whether it was set by a client-side application or by server side. The cookie will behave exactly the same from that point forward. In fact, you can't even tell. If you just look at a cookie, you cannot tell by looking at a cookie after it's been set which method it was set by. So what this means, client-side means that some technology loaded JavaScript code on your page, and some line of code within that JavaScript set the cookie using a DOM API called document.cookie. And you can see right here on this cookie initiator entry, it says line 7, column 20,000, which means we can tell you right down to the line and column of the code where that cookie was set, where the code is that set that cookie. And that's for client-side cookies. And then server-side cookies are where your page makes an HTTP request to a web server. And in the response to that request, the web server says, hey, browser, please set a cookie. And that's done via a header called set cookie. And it specifies all the same stuff that a client-side cookie will set. And so that's how that happens. Two methods, client-side, server-side.
Fantastic. Mike, I'm going to grab you for a second. I mean, I know you've been using this and working with brands that are using this new technology. Was there any aha moment for you or just big utilization that you're seeing as this has come out the gates? This unlocks new abilities for people once they have this information in their hands?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of our analytics and data privacy customers, the ability to run an Observe Point audit on maybe 250,000 pages, find every single cookie that may be or that is on their website, and then getting to the point and deciding that we need to remove a cookie. Before we had cookie origins, you were stopped there. It would say, we know the cookie is on this page, we know we need to remove it, I don't know where
Good
it is.
luck.
Right? Good luck finding it. And so actually, this cookie origin is saying this cookie is precisely created by this code at this exact line. That takes you all the way down to the root cause analysis, and it makes the solution very, very quickly. But the second big thing, we found out that actually most customers, sometimes you build product and software, and customers are so ingenious. Sometimes they do things that you don't expect them to do, or they say things you don't expect. And we thought everyone would love us for helping them find out how the third-party cookies were being dropped by third-party technologies. Well, actually, it actually became quite obvious. The Google Analytics cookie was dropped by Google Analytics. The Crux cookie was dropped by Crux on the crux.net domain, for example. Many of our customers told us that they were finding this extremely useful for first-party cookies I should say cookies that their own organization and their own code base are creating, because their own developers had not documented things very well. So they were actually saying that we had no clue about our own cookies. The third-party stuff was easy. We could turn off the code and the cookie would disappear in most cases. And actually, that's one point. And Dave, you've made this point before. Just because a cookie is dropped by a third-party technology does not mean it's a third-party cookie, and vice versa. If a cookie that's dropped by your own technology, it's not necessarily a first-party cookie either. Is that right, Dave?
Yeah, the term first-party and third-party are often misinterpreted. The definition for first-party and third-party is actually a very technical one and has nothing to do with the organization that owns or created that cookie. For example, you could have a third-party vendor loading technology on your website, but that vendor can produce first-party cookies, even though it's a third-party vendor, right? So we're actually going to help with this in the coming months. We're going to launch a feature that will tell you exactly which vendor set each cookie a little bit more clearly, so that even if a first-party cookie was loaded by a third-party vendor, it'll be clear in the observe point reporting.
And actually, Dave, I want to stop you there. We have actually prepared a poll, and this brings us perfectly. So Ryan, our moderator, I'd love for you to raise this poll for our audience and get things a bit interactive, and just prove that we actually are live. There's always that doubt, isn't there? So we'll give everyone some time. But do you think that analytics vendors usually use first party or third party, and do we think that advertising networks generally use first party or third party cookies? Yeah, Dave, absolutely. Personally, really looking forward to the next release. So the thing that most product teams hate is, when is it going to be out? The question that thou shalt not ask.
It'll be out when it's ready, Mike. I'm just kidding. We are planning in the next about 3 months will be generally available.
Brilliant.
Awesome. And as that's being answered, the poll questions are being answered, it's more of a quiz, just trying to gauge the audience's understanding of this topic. Mike, I want to highlight something you said just a minute ago, and that is, for when you're looking at initiation, what are the technologies or tags that are setting all the myriad of cookies on my website? A lot of times it can be easy to make pretty basic inferences on third-party cookies because you see those third-party domains. If I see LinkedIn.com and then I see a cookie I don't recognize, I can pretty safely say, okay, I know that's coming from LinkedIn and Microsoft. Similar with Google or Twitter. But when I see things coming from my own domain, for example, here I see www.observepoint.com. If I don't know what the opt-in-on consent cookie is, and I just see my own domain, that doesn't give me a lot of guidance. So I think you're right. In a lot of ways, it's that set of first-party cookies that are on a first-party domain that I may not know what's the actual third-party technology that's setting those. That's where the clarity comes in. Was that what you were highlighting?
Yeah, exactly. So opt-in-on consent, that's actually the cookie that OneTrust uses. But you can see it's actually dropped on the www.observepoint.com domain. So you can't directly say, imagine I didn't know that was the OneTrust cookie, and I just naively thought it's a first-party cookie, it's my own cookie, it's safe. That logic actually is false. That's the point I was trying to make.
Yep, that's a good one. All right, that should have given everybody enough time to think through and give the answers. Ryan, if you are able to push those poll results, we'd love to just see how the audience did on those two questions. All right, so it looks like we've got For the first question, do analytics vendors generally use first or third-party cookies? Understanding that analytics vendors like Adobe and Google, those are third-party. They're outside technologies that you license to bring in on your website. 74% of respondents said first-party and 26% said third-party. Usually analytics platforms are using first-party cookies. I know dating back to my years at Omniture and Adobe, we started pushing people fairly early on to implement that technology in the first-party context, meaning using a domain that made that cookie appear as a first-party cookie. So about 3/4 of our audience are familiar with that. There are still some analytics vendors, although fewer and fewer, that do still implement in a third-party context with a third-party cookie. But for the vast majority, generally, analytics vendors do use that first-party cookie.
Maybe can I make a short comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a reason for this, which is a motivation of the use case that analytics vendors are actually trying to satisfy. Analytics vendors are, generally speaking, not trying to track users across sites. And that's an important distinction, because you as an owner of a website, you care about the users coming to your domain, and you care about repeat users and knowing who they are when they come back, and conversion funnels and things like that. But strictly for the purposes of analytics, generally, now, like Cameron said, there are exceptions to this rule, but generally speaking, you only care about tracking users within the context of your domain name. Hence why first-party cookies are actually all that is necessary. Certainly they could use a third-party cookie, sort of, but actually third-party cookies have a whole set of problems that would make them harder to track users within your domain. So keep that in mind as well. But that's why. There's just not an incentive to do it, and so why expose yourself to the risk of third-party cookies when you don't really need it?
And
Yeah.
Dave, conversely, how does that logic spin on its head for the second question, advertising networks?
Yeah, great question. And that is, for advertising, advertisers really care about your cross-website activity. They want to know what websites you go to. They want to know what product searches you do. This allows them to give you the best search results that are actually targeted to your interests and topics. And so in order to do that, to actually track your usage across websites, they must use a third-party cookie, because the browser simply won't send information with a first-party cookie to their common advertising tracking domain.
Yeah, and so when we look at the results of that question, do advertising networks use first or third-party cookies? We saw naturally a flip back. So where we're only having 33% people say that they think they use first-party cookies, and 66% saying they think they use third-party. And so in the vast majority of advertising networks that we encounter, certainly, it is in that third-party context. It is to be able to cross domain track, not just tracking within a single domain. And ultimately, that's one more clarity, Dave, I want to make, because it came up during and after our last session, is what actually determines if something is first or third party. And I think we got a pretty decent understanding that it's on my domain. But even in this cookie that I'm looking at right here, www.observepoint.com, that's showing up as first party, but I have a lot of different subdomains on my website. For example, resources.observepoint.com, help.observepoint.com. Help us understand how subdomains play into the definition of first versus third party.
Great question. Browsers are very particular about this. You might even say they're pedantic about it. When a cookie is set, the initiator who sets that cookie can choose what domain they want that cookie to be set for. Now, the browser will only accept certain domains. For example, if you're trying to set a client-side cookie and you tell it, hey, I know I'm running on observepoint.com right now, but I want to set a google.com cookie, the browser will straight up reject that cookie. It will simply ignore it. It's as if you never asked for the cookie to be created. But you can set a cookie with the same domain you're on, and you can set a cookie with the same subdomain you're on. The browser will accept both of those. So for example, if I'm on resources.observepoint.com and I set a cookie for observepoint.com, that works. That's no problem. And then anytime I go to any subdomain of observepoint.com, that cookie will be transmitted to the website from the browser. But I can also set a more specific subdomain in my cookie. I can say, hey, browser, I want to set a cookie on resources.observepoint.com. Then when the user navigates to resources.observepoint.com, the browser will give the website that cookie. But if the user navigates to www.observepoint.com, the browser will not give that website that cookie, because the cookie has a different subdomain and domain than what you're currently on.
Yeah, it's a key distinction that I think once you explain it, most people understand it, but I think a lot of people just forget about that or don't really look deeply into, okay, did I set my cookies that are first party cookies just based on that core domain, or does it have a different subdomain? And that creates, especially for privacy folks that are trying to avoid the use of any third party cookies in certain instances, it creates certain challenges that we have to think through.
Yeah, and just to add one more point, this is kind of like a third party, actually, because think about within a large organization, you might have an e-commerce site, and then you might have a support site, and you don't necessarily want a user's e-commerce activity following them to their support activity. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but that's something that you need to consider when choosing what domain for your application cookies.
Yeah. All right, we've spent a ton of time on, kind of the deeper intricacies of cookies and what they're doing and how they're functioning. Love this additional context. We've had great feedback so far from the brands we're working with as far as getting this additional level of insight. But we do want to reserve a little bit of time now to talk about where are cookies going, not just where are they coming from. And I know a lot of this is around. We talk about ITP from Apple and Safari, where they just brute force started blocking third-party cookies across the board. I think that was back in 2018-ish, maybe even earlier than that. Firefox came on board with that same approach shortly thereafter. But we've now got a world in which Google has been telling us for a while that they're going to be making a change. I think the first announcement came out in January of 2020, and they're like, we are going to make third-party cookies eventually deprecated, and they gave a bit of a timeline. And then they punted on that timeline. They've continued to give updates, and the most recent one came out just last month in July. Mike, I know you've been doing a ton of research on Google's and Chrome specifically's approach to third-party cookies and the privacy sandbox. Why don't you give us a bit of an overview and take us through what we should be seeing happening over the next 12 to 18 months?
Sure thing. Well, Cameron, I have this is going to be. I've been probably researching this for about a week now, so hopefully, everyone will appreciate the amount of hard work that's gone into this. It was June the 22nd when Google actually, it was sometime last month, July the 13th actually, when Google released Chrome version 115. Can you believe it? And actually, in this version, they released to kind of a wider audience what they're calling their privacy sandbox features. And I'm actually going to share my screen if that's okay with you.
Yeah. There you go.
If I share my screen and just show you. So this is their Google's official page for this new release, so July the 13th. And it's really, they've essentially pushed forward these all this privacy sandbox stuff. So if I scroll this down, so this is all the good stuff, right? But to save everyone, the mind-boggling reading, you've mentioned how ITP has brute force blocked essentially third-party ad networks. And actually, we do have a poll for our audience, a second poll, I should say. So Ryan, if you could pop up that second poll, it would be great to see how ready our audience is for what we're about to talk about. Fundamentally, technologies like Firefox and Apple and Safari have made it impossible for third-party ad networks to continue functioning as they always have. And let's talk about what that always, that past state is. So in the past, starting with Internet Explorer and technologies before that, browsers before that, cookies were always stored in a single file. So website A and website B and website C, along with the embedded third-party technologies, would actually just dump cookies into one big pile of cookies. And that made it possible for, as we can see in this diagram here, technology C embedded within website A and website B to actually read the same cookie. So if I went to, so I watched the Barbie film a couple of weeks ago. Let's say I went to the website of the cinema and I made a booking and I accepted cookies. Maybe PayPal would know that I had been to that cinema brand. And then maybe straight afterwards, I decided to go to Volkswagen and look for a new car. And again, I bought a car with PayPal. That would be a very weird situation. But PayPal would know that on this day, this unique user bought a new car and bought a cinema ticket. And that is what we're calling essentially cross-domain, ability to read that user's information. What is happening, and what Google have announced, and finally they've caught up with Firefox really, is that can no longer happen. So they're calling it essentially a partitioned cookie jar. So now website A with the PayPal technology, for example, will still work, and you can still pay for your cinema tickets. And website B with a car, you can still pay for your car. But those two bits of information cannot be combined together to build a profile of someone who likes films and has just bought a new car. You can imagine, like, if someone's bought a new car, you can market a lot of stuff at them. A new sat nav. It bought a new house, a new car. They might want a new house, right? These are high value items, and they're prime profiling targets. Okay, so that is on what we're calling, what we're internally at Observepoint calling cookie jars, and actually what Google have also depicted. Now, I find this really funny. They've actually called this cookies have independent partitioned states, or they've shortened it to chips.
That seems like a really tortured way just to get to a good acronym.
Yeah, I think they've always seen in the technology space, like, right? Why are they called cookies? No one knows. Well, in 5 years' time, we'll be saying, why are they called chips? But I think technology companies want to show their leadership and also just make a stamp by naming something and getting themselves in the history books for being the ones that invented chips.
Are they just chips in the UK, Mike, or are they fries over here? How does that work?
We have fish and chips, fries. We understand you, but only in McDonald's, really.
Nice.
Now, it doesn't.
Oh, go ahead.
It doesn't stop at cookies. There are other types of storage that have now been partitioned as well. So if I scroll down here a bit further, I'm going to move in here. What used to be called storage, and actually I'll show you. If I open a new tab in my Google Chrome and we go to application, we have actually this section. It's called storage. So you can see local storage, session storage. These are all technical behind the scenes things, but fundamentally you need to know that they currently are also kind of one big box. Privacy Sandbox will essentially give you separate local storages for each website as well. So again, partitioning. And now the problem becomes, how do technologies that are broadly third party, such as the ad networks, how do they build a profile about you if they can't learn about you across different domains? And that's where we have a fundamental shift. And that's also why we asked. And actually, I'm going to stop there, Cameron. Do we have the results for the second poll?
Yeah, as you're pulling that up, Ryan, if you could push those results. So it looks like about 21% said yes, they're ready and have a plan. 53%, so over half, say no, they're still in kind of a wait and see process. So I think a lot of people are at that point. We've heard Google punt off this timeline a few times. We saw them go through the iteration of flock, and the flock fell out of the sky and flat on its face. So maybe people are still, people are still waiting to see if this actually takes off. But I think in general, there's some people that are just learning. We got another 26% that said, they don't really know what the Google Sandbox is. So
why are they even on this on our show today?
Well, because they're trying to learn from you, Mike. You've given a really good overview of what's happening. I think that's part of what people are trying to do, is just understand how that changing landscape is happening.
Excellent. Yep. So actually, it's great to see those results. Great to see there are some people who are 21% who are starting to plan for this. And I'm glad, 75+% are keen to learn. And that's exactly what we're here for. So we've built a picture where what we know, the current world is going to be separated, and it's going to be impossible to build an easy target for advertising. So how are these ad networks going to, maintain what you do? How is Google going to build a profile? And so this is where it fundamentally that gets very different. Instead of a third-party ad network building a profile about you, Google Chrome will now build a profile about you. And that happens in this brand new section here called interest groups. So if I, on my browser, visit a website and buy a cinema ticket, and then I visit a website and buy a car. Websites that are set up correctly for these interest groups will actually start storing information about what I'm interested in this section. And then third-party ad networks will have to use an API call to connect to read interest groups.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, and I know when all this came out, we said, okay, if we just start blocking third-party cookies altogether, we're going to go back to the days of 2004, 2005, where everything's a content network, and it's just a matter of what page am I on right now to help determine my interest. Dave, I know you've done a lot of research into this area, and you started looking at what this fundamental shift in the market looks like. How are you interpreting this change, and what is the real impact to the market going to interest groups as well as all the other stuff that Mike's introduced us to this point?
Yeah, so the fundamental shift here is that your targeted interests that ad networks currently track, that information currently is stored on the server side. Typically, Google servers will have this information about you. LinkedIn will have this information about you. Google wants to move that with the Privacy Sandbox to the browser. So there will be two effects of this. Number one is that previously, your interests were only tracked for websites that participated in the ad network. By virtue of these third-party cookies, the browser would send, hey, we got a cookie, or it would make an API call back to Google's ad network to say, you went to a dog food product page, so we know you're interested in dogs and dog food. Now that information is moving in the browser, that will be all websites. Any website you go to will now be eligible to track your interest in the browser, because the site itself does not have to even know that Chrome is tracking you, and it doesn't necessarily have to send that information back to a Google server, because the information is actually stored on your computer with your browser. Okay, so that's effect number one, is that these the scope of your interests will be tracked more broadly across all websites, not just websites that participate in these ad networks. Number two, Google will become much more powerful as an advertiser, because now the interests and topics of you as a website user will be gatekept within the Google Chrome browser, which means that, after they do one other thing, which is kill third-party cookies. And I believe this gives Google strong incentive to stop supporting third-party cookies, because they no longer need it, and all the information they want is stored in the browser. So it will actually be hard for other ad networks who don't operate a web browser to collect information when now both Apple and Google have stopped all third-party cookies.
Now, Dave, in our research, we have this competition, this issue for other ad networks has been discussed. So the Competition Markets Authority, I think they're kind of the UK equivalent of the SEC. They have raised this very issue with Google, and they've come to an agreement, and Google have agreed that they will be very transparent and they will share this data with the third-party ad networks. So they're agreeing to play nice in order to get this thing through right now.
They are. And to be fair, Google is doing all of this development in the open. So these APIs are going to be well known and well publicized. So if I'm Meta and I'm operating my Facebook ad network, I certainly can write code to use these APIs to extract user interests. But if there's a time window where Google shuts off third-party cookies and I'm Meta or I'm LinkedIn and I haven't yet adopted these new APIs, the effectiveness of my ads are going to go way down until I do. And so, yeah, it is open in the sense that anyone can call this API, but it is very much controlled by Google and puts them even more in the driver's seat than they were before.
So wait, let me see if I can synthesize what I'm hearing here. So you're saying Google took what could have been catastrophic for their business, because so much of their revenues come from ad dollars.
Meaning killing third-party cookies, right? This could have been catastrophic.
And instead of having it somewhat harm their business, it actually looks like they're putting in a bit of a competitive moat that actually helps them more than anything else.
I think
is
so.
That right?
I believe that is the case. They are going to be in even more of a controlling situation than they were before.
Well, that is a true big brain move, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Google's not full of dummies.
Yeah, it's interesting that, as you said, Dave, it's no longer reliant on sending information server side. And if I have a Google Pixel on that page, I might be able to capture that information. Now that it's all stored on the browser itself, they're going to get way more information than they've ever had before. Is that the right way to be thinking about it?
I believe that is true. In fact, there's a demo on the Google Privacy Sandbox website where you can see a video showing what happens in what they call the interest model, where Google is trying to derive from your website history and website content, which your interests might be. You can actually see it live. You can actually go to that tab that Cameron was just showing. You can navigate to a few different websites and see your interests update in near real time. It takes a minute or two, and it'll show you like, oh, Dave's interested in new cars and sat navs, like Mike said.
So is this a scenario of the rich get richer? We've got Google is already indicating where they're going, and they're rolling this out to their first cohort of users by the end of the year. We're going to see a slow and steady rollout through the end of next year to the point where it's fully live for everybody. Apple, through Safari, has kind of, as I said, taken that brute force approach of just block everything. Does this give them any incentive to switch to a little bit more accommodating approach?
This is so interesting because Apple is not primarily an advertising business. Google is. So this is why Apple so early adopted the idea of stopping third-party cookies, because they just don't care. Their businesses don't care if their customers get good ads or not, and so they were like, they tend to be pretty privacy centric. So they said, look, let's just stop these cookies because they're not doing our users any favors, because they're enabling this wholesale tracking. Okay, fine. They did that like you said, like 5 years ago, Google has been very slow to do this because I think they were waiting to find the opportunity to actually make it be an advantage for their business instead of a disadvantage. But in the meantime, Google has lost, I think, a fair bit of revenue because all these iPhone Safari users have not had third-party cookie tracking, which means that the ads that Google delivers at this point to the ads they deliver to Apple iPhone users have not been as targeted as they could have been.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen next?
Maybe, and therefore lower.
Yeah, exactly. Lower conversion, potentially, lower click-throughs. So for the longest time, I thought that Google was going to just slow roll the third-party cookie phase out forever. But I no longer believe that. After going deep on some of these privacy sandbox APIs, I think they want to do it as quick as possible because it only makes their competitive position stronger if they can get people to adopt these Google privacy sandbox APIs, which they will, because they're going to be controlling all this data. So every Android phone and every Chrome user on the desktop, if you want to do targeted ads for those users, you have to use the privacy sandbox API when Google kills third-party cookies. And they're promising to do that in the first quarter of next year with 1% of Chrome users, and then slowly ramp it up over the course of 2024. So now we got to get to crazy predictions, Cameron, because you kind of asked like what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
I think any advertising network that doesn't own a web browser with large market share is going to be at a disadvantage here. There's going to be competitive pressure to own your own data and not depend on Google, who is competing with you for ad supply.
Yeah.
So here we have companies like Microsoft, who owns LinkedIn, which is in the top 3 biggest advertising networks in the world. They have a browser, but it has very small market share, right? Edge.
Yeah.
It ships with every Windows computer, but there is no Windows phone really to speak of. And so they don't have great market share there. They're going to have a strong incentive to increase that market share. Meta, who owns also top 3 advertising network, they don't have a phone at all. They have devices you can put on your face, but they don't have a phone or a browser. If I were kind of looking in my crystal ball, I would say that Meta is going to try to create a edge device or application that has more market share, whether it's a phone or a browser. And maybe they'll just double down on the thing you put on your face, the goggle ads. But maybe not. We'll see. So I mean, I think if Meta wants to stay competitive in the ad space, they will probably create a browser or a phone. And I think anyone who runs an ad network and doesn't operate a browser is going to be at a disadvantage.
And what about for our audience out there? Might be a publisher or a demand side organization wanting to advertise. Do they need to do anything? What would be the kind of key thoughts and takeaways for
so if you're on the demand side, meaning, or a publisher, meaning you operate a website and you place ads from an ad network on your site, I believe, now I'm not an expert here, but I believe there's nothing you're going to need to do, especially if it's Google Ads, because what's going to happen is Google themselves will update their ad rendering applications that get embedded on your site to use the Google Privacy Sandbox APIs for these browsers as those APIs get turned on for these users.
Can we summarize that as it's so important to Google that they'll do the hard stuff for you and you can just sit along for the ride?
I believe that is going to be the case. Anything else will cost Google revenue.
Yeah. And
But in
what
general,
about if you're focusing on, if you're using an ad network that may not be Google? What if you are professional and you're looking at the LinkedIn ad network?
I believe that it will be the same situation, but again, I don't know. See, I really wonder what LinkedIn and Meta are going to do about this, because at some point, some of their users are going to start losing the ability to have third-party cookies. And when that happens, the only way to get the targeting information they need to deliver relevant ads that get good clicks and good revenue will be to use the Google privacy APIs. But remember, Safari doesn't have a privacy sandbox API. They don't have the interests API. And that's by design, right? And maybe Apple will come up with a competitor, but I think life's going to get really complicated for these ad networks over the course of the next year or two if they want to keep delivering high relevancy, high click-through rate targeted advertising.
So for many of our listeners, the wait and see approach still works.
Yeah. I think that's probably the best approach right now. But we'll find out.
Well, and I would add one additional thing to that, and that is don't just wait and see, but still understand what your risk is. I mean, as we know, there's still 20 to 30% of the web right now through browsers like Safari and Firefox that are rejecting third-party cookies outright. And so how much of your technology on the websites you're running are susceptible to that 20 to 30% disruption, whatever that means, data collection, functionality, et cetera.
Looking through click-through rates on a browser level instead, conversion rates, traffic, opt-in, opt-out rates. Right?
Yeah. So I think in general, just getting a sense of where you lie. We typically give people the 50-50 benchmark. If more than 50% of the cookies on your website are third party, you should probably look into why that is and if there's appropriate ways to move more things to the first party context. Not everything has to be a first party cookie, but you want to understand what that exposure and risk is.
Great.
All right.
Well said.
Now I would love to keep rolling on this.
Questions, Cameron?
Are there any questions in the? We've been answering a few going along.
There was one question from Amy Lewis, who asked the question quite a while ago, so she's definitely in the front of the queue. So the question is, what sort of visibility can we get into non-cookie data sharing activity with third parties through the website? And I think that refers to, I'm going to look at you, Dave. Do you think this is referring to the fenced frames aspect? Is that, if you scroll halfway up there?
Yeah, so you're talking about Amy Lewis's question?
Yep.
Yeah, I think, so there's a lot of different ways for websites and vendors to share data, and a lot of it is behind the scenes. For example, what you see in third-party cookies, like let's just take the Amazon search example. I'm sure you've all had this experience. You go on Amazon, you search for a product, and then you go out and navigate the web on some random website, and sure enough, all you're getting is advertising for that and similar products. How does that happen? Well, the way that happens is there's actually a behind-the-scenes interchange of information that you cannot see. The in front of the scenes information, or in front of the curtain information, is the cookie that goes back and forth to identify you as a user by some ID string. That you can observe. Now, with the Privacy Sandbox API, that will no longer exist. So just keep that in mind, because that's just not how it's going to work. In fact, that's actually probably the good thing about the Privacy Sandbox API. Just a quick tangent on that is that you will no longer be identified as a unique person with all of your personal information. You know, today Google knows so much about me. They probably know my address, my interests. They probably know my body weight and my weight loss and weight gain struggles. You know, they probably know everything about me, and they know all the stuff they need to advertise to me. That will change under the Privacy Sandbox API so that they only know enough information to render relevant ads, such as my interests. But setting that aside for the moment, the way this works today is there's all kinds of different ways for sites to exchange information. Cookies are the primary way for cross-site interactions to identify you. And as far as I know, the only way to identify you in a cross-site interaction where you're say you're visiting some website and you're now seeing Amazon search results or Amazon ads relevant to your prior Amazon search results. And so it's very hard, and I don't know of a way to actually observe this information when customers share. And just to call out one noteworthy example, Facebook got into a lot of trouble because they shared users' private information with a company called Cambridge Analytica about 7 years ago. This started, and I think the suits are just settling now. That the way that Facebook shared that information was more like a behind-the-scenes exchange of information, like maybe sending files via email or or FTP or something. You know, it was not over cookies on the web. Now, the cookies certainly contain information that help identify people whose information was also stored in those files that they exchanged. But make no mistake that you cannot tell if Google or Facebook is secretly giving your information to some other company.
Bring in a USB stick, just
exactly. You're not wrong. I mean, that wouldn't be how they do it, but that kind of metaphor is exactly what's happening here. Imagine a Google employee walking a USB stick across the street to Cambridge Analytica and handing it to them. There's no way that you as a consumer can detect that happened.
And Dave, is it possible for, say, a survey, right? A survey running inside an iframe on website A currently, and then maybe the same survey or a survey by the same technology running on website B, if I were to answer both of those surveys on the same device, currently, can they extrapolate that I am the same person?
Definitely. You don't even have to answer the survey. You just have to see it.
Oh.
And they already know.
Okay, so I think that would be an example where maybe cookies are not used, or maybe it's like a local store.
No, that actually is. So that would be a third-party cookie use case that identifies you. Now, when browsers stop supporting third-party cookies, it will no longer be possible to specifically identify you as the same person. But the survey vendor will know that this person and this person have the same interests. And they might be the same person, but they might not. And Google's actually going to lengths to prevent you from knowing that. One of the things they're doing is inserting random noise into your interests. So 5% of the interests in your Google Chrome interest model will be randomly generated. And so that actually makes it very difficult for a survey vendor, for example, to know that this user with these interests and this user with these interests are actually the same person.
So they're intentionally introducing noise into the model, so you have an ability to claim, maybe I wasn't so interested in that thing you said I was. That's the 5%.
Also, they will be the only ones that have the ability to know what was probably randomly introduced and what is genuine. So they're the ones that will have the best targeting.
That is technically quite true, but I hope, fingers crossed, that Google builds this in such a way that even Google can't tell the difference between noise interests and true interests.
Yeah, but they'll have the model that they use to build.
I know,
so they'll have a separate team that's firewalled off that could still figure out.
Maybe, yeah.
Hoping Google does the right thing. I don't know if that's a good strategy or not.
Well, and I do want to say, Cameron, just by way of disclaimer, I don't want anything that I've said today to come across as accusing Google of wrongdoing in this case. I actually don't have enough information to say whether they're doing all right or any wrong. And so some of these examples I'm throwing out, they are hypothetical. And I don't necessarily think that Google is doing something wrong here. But the economic effect seems pretty clear. Google's going to be in a good spot after this is done.
Yeah, I think that's the good sum up of it all. Well, we could probably keep rolling. For those of you that want to connect with Dave directly in person, just a call out to next month, we'll be holding Edge here in Utah. Got a lot of folks that are on the line. I can see today they're actually already registered and they'll be there. If you haven't already, September 25th through the 27th in Provo. Dave will be there. I'll be there. Lots more information about cookies, both what the current state of the world is, as well as where things are going. So please join us at Edge. Dave, before we sign off, first, where can people find you? If people want to reach out, get more information, just chat you up, where can they find you online?
Let's see. Probably the best place to find me is on LinkedIn. If you just search for Dave Smith and Observe Point, you'll find me pretty readily. There are also thousands of other Dave Smiths. Unfortunately, I'm the only one at Observe Point, though. So that's probably the best way to find me on LinkedIn. Thanks so much.
Does chatting you up mean the same thing in the US as it does in the UK?
Just the fact that you're asking me that probably means no. Am I saying something I shouldn't to the UK audience?
I'm sure everyone would love to chat Dave up.
Fantastic. Dave, any final parting thoughts on the subject in general as you've dug into the realm of cookie and the shifting in the marketplace, et cetera?
No, thanks, Cameron. Really appreciate you having me on. It's a complex world, a lot of change. I think over the next 12 to 18 months, we're going to enter a so-called new normal of user tracking and interest tracking for advertising networks.
There's going to be a lot of change, and Observe Point is here to support all of our customers through understanding that change and dealing with inevitably the fallout of that change. We don't know what it is, but we'll wait and see.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, appreciate you joining us today, Dave. Mike, as always, it's a pleasure. And on behalf of myself and the entire Observe Point crew, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you all.